Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another House Salt live show. For those of you who are new here, House Salt is just us, this group of friends. We pick a book every month and then we talk about it on our live show. And this month we've picked The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins, which is the prequel book to the Hunger Games trilogy. So I'm going to ask everybody to introduce themselves, their channel, and by way of introduction, tell us what they rated this book. I'll start. Hello, I'm Mari from the channel. My name is Inés, and I gave this 1.5 out of 5 stars.
Hi guys, I'm Sam from Thoughts on Tomes, and I also gave this 1.5 out of 5 stars.
I'm Jordan from the Jordan Journals, and I gave this book a 2 out of 5 stars.
I'm Connor from the channel Connor O'Brien, and I also gave this like 2 stars.
I'm Paige from Minimal Bookie, and I wouldn't even rate this book.
I'm Kayla from Bookadoodles, and I gave this book 2 to 2.5 stars.
Okay, so great. Usually we have like some sort of average and then a couple outliers, but I think this is like a pretty good consensus about how we're feeling about this book. I already see people in the comments saying that they DNF'd. I would have DNF'd.
Same, 100%.
The only thing that keeping me reading was like, okay, I have to. Literally just finished 2 minutes ago. So before we get into talking about this book particularly, I thought it would be cool to do like a quick rundown of like your history. Obviously, we've all read the Hunger Games trilogy, but when did you read it? Do you love it? Like, what's kind of your history with the franchise?
So I read it when they first came out. I read the first 2 books back to back because they were already out and Mockingjay wasn't quite out yet. And my dad actually introduced them to me, who at the time he would have been like in his 70s. So that was funny. And I loved them. And then I obviously watched the movies as they came out, but I haven't actually reread the series since I first read it. I mostly just rewatched the movies and stuff. So some of the things that were in here, I sort of was like, are these Easter eggs? Did I know this before? Because it had been over 8 years at least since I'd read them. So yeah, I like them a lot. They're in my feelings, but I'm not a rereader of them all the time.
I read them when the first movie was coming out. So they were all already out and I read them back to back. And I've reread Mockingjay when the last Mockingjay movie came out, but I haven't read them since then. And they're one of my favorite series. I love the original trilogy and I would reread it. I don't really watch the movies too much though. I find them very sad.
I'm kind of like Sam. I read them when they first originally were coming out. Like I had to wait for every single book to come out, except for my dad didn't introduce them to me. But and I think I reread the first book 1 time, and I actually never watched either of the Mockingjay movies, but I watched the other 2.
I read them just before the first movie came out. I was about 16 and I read them all in one weekend because they were all obviously out by that point. And then I recently reread them this year because I was doing a podcast with a friend and that was like what we chose to like reread and rewatch. And it was the whole experience and it felt a lot more relevant, especially now, even though I read them earlier in the year, like some of the stuff I saw in them is really particularly happening right now. Yeah.
I have no context for when I read them, but it was pre-movies because I wasn't tracking my reading back then. I just have like a vague memory of I read these books. Then the movies came out, and I think like the Hunger Games is now a thing that is very much like pop culture versus just like the books itself. So I think a lot of like my strong feelings about the series have been like because of the pop culture and the movies and all that. But I also reread them this year for a podcast, and I was like, oh no, like in 20 whatever when I read them, I was like, who would do this? And now I'm reading them like our government. That's the answer. So they've always lived really strongly in my feelings, but rereading them this year, I'm like, no, these are like, they held up really, really well. And I just found a new appreciation for them as an adult. So I think that made my anger towards this new book even greater, which we'll get to. But yeah, I really, really admire and like this franchise.
I read all 3 books right around the time Mockingjay, the book, came out. I read them all in a weekend on vacation, and my family kind of hated me, but I was like, I can't put these down. I love the series. Like, it's probably one of my all-time favorite series. And of course, I love the movies, and I don't know. Like, I agree with Maddie, like, when it's about pop culture now. So, like, it's, like, ingrained in our, like, we even quote it, like, may the odds be ever in your, like, it's, like, ingrained in us. So that's, I mean, and also from a writing standpoint, the Hunger Games, like the first book, is literally like a masterclass in story structure.
Yep.
So that made me equally like more even disappointed in this book because wow, pacing.
I kind of went back and forth about how like we would even approach talking about this because there are so many like big story things like pacing and plot and things that I just have issues with. But ultimately, the thing that got me angry from like when the announcement happened to the thing that makes me angriest now was when they're like, it's a President Snow book. And like, who asked for that? Who asked for President Snow?
Nobody.
And then
did.
everybody was like, no, not everybody. I saw some people were like, yeah, this is trash. And some people were like, no, calm down. Trust Suzanne Collins. She gave us the Hunger Games. Like, she can do this. Maybe she'll be saying it something. So I guess the part where I want to start is this as a President Snow book and the character of, I don't even say his name. My eyes just his name whenever I read it. Coriolanus. There's 2 names that end with anus in this book. So Coriolanus, how did you like his? You can't even like it. What did you think of his characterization and this book as being a book about him?
I mean, I think what a lot of people have said about it, what we're kind of saying about it, is like no one asked. Like I didn't want to see how he was when he was younger, and the fact that there was no character arc at all. I didn't want a redemption arc. Like, let it be clear, because some people, when I posted my vlog, were like, well, you just wanted a redemption. No, I did not. I specifically did not. I just wanted him to change throughout the story, and he did not. So that was very hard to read, especially when we had other characters that probably would have made more sense to follow. And I think it would have been a better book if we were following someone else and he was a side character and you got to see how, like, oh, he's been awful the whole time, but you're not following him because there wasn't much of a point to it. So yeah, the first moment when he said that the house smelled like poverty, like it was all downhill from there.
Yep.
I was like that was just, I was like, oh, this is what we're getting into.
Yep.
Okay, cool. And just the whole idea of like this disenfranchised rich white man, and he's so angry at the world. I'm like, I do not need to read this. So yeah, I was angry the entire time, and I also didn't read his name. I just did blah, 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 whenever I saw it on the page.
I listened to the audiobook, and it's written down so many times, and the audiobook narrator has to say it over and over and over again. I was like, I'm so sick of hearing about Choreo.
Yeah, I feel like the thing I was struggling with was like the whole idea of writing from this perspective comes from a place of privilege, that you could put yourself here and want to know or like explore the idea of like this person who is so horrible throughout the entire like book for over 500 pages of this. And that was what I was struggling with, was like why, like I was in the audience for this book very clearly, because everything they explore I already knew. Like it taught nothing and it changed nothing. Just read the original trilogy if you want to know what she talks about in this book, to be honest.
There was so much. I feel like she was answering questions that nobody asked. Like why does, I never read the original trilogy and thought, why does Snow hate Katniss so much? I never asked that. I know what he is. He's a child murderer. It doesn't, there's no point of me wanting to know why he hates one particular child more because he's a child murderer. I don't care. So then to bring us back and be like, but he has reasons for hating Katniss. Like, he has a connection to District 12 and, war is bad and it hurt him. Like, none of that changes anything or colors anything that I read in the original trilogy. And I don't think it did a very good job in answering any of the questions we didn't have. It even answered those well, because it's not coming back and showing you like he was once a good guy and then he turned bad. No, He was bad from page 1 in The Boiled Cabbage and the Poverty. He was like a sucky person. There was never one point in the book that I was like, oh, but he might change. I never bought it. It's clear in the entire thing that he has no interest in anybody but himself. So you brought us back here all these years later to be like, he was always a bad dude.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was also one of the things that, like, the Easter eggs of that, while the Easter eggs were like fun in a way, and that's why I gave it the extra 0.5 and not just a 1, it was still like making these connections that like were almost redoing stuff about the original series. Like, it's like, if you would have hinted about some of these things in the original because you had this book in mind, fine. But like, she didn't, because this book was not something that she was going to write before. This is something that she definitely chose to write later. So there was none of this hint of like, oh, he was really bothered by mockingjays and he really hated this particular song because it was his former love, and he doesn't like Katniss because it's that herb they found. Like, what? So all of these things that she tried to connect are just like, this doesn't even make sense in the context of the original series. You're just putting these in as like Easter eggs to like, ooh, it's Katniss the herb.
Or even like the bigger ones where they lost all their money because it was invested in District 13 and then 13 was bombed. And that's why he's so bitter about District 13. And I was like,
right. Like, we didn't need it. Like Mari's saying, we didn't need any of these explanations because we didn't need to know why he hates. Like, there's no reason. And so giving it this kind of like weird context, like, actually makes him a worse character in my opinion, because I didn't really like, he's a decent villain, like he's fine. He's not like my favorite villain of all time or anything, but like how he was in the original series was fine. I didn't need context for him. Like, there's nothing, I didn't need to learn anything about him. I wasn't like, wow, Snow is so interesting. Like, he's not, he's an ass. So I don't need all this context for him.
And like, the book was just so long, and he just is always the victim, and things are always happening to him, and nothing is ever his fault. It's just like, I hate you, and you're making me listen to this 16-hour audiobook. Shut up.
Yeah. I remember at one point in the third act when Sejanus, is that his name? I don't know how to say his name.
Who knows?
Sejanus.
When he finally died or got killed, like Snow like trampled back to his room or whatever. I'm like, oh, is he gonna have a moment? No, it was automatically like, oh, how does this impact me? Like, who's gonna find out this? Like, well, I'm like, oh, okay, well, I would DNF this book right now. Yeah, it was just hard to read. Like, it's just unsettling. Like, I didn't need it.
or even like trying to pull like in the roses from the original trilogy. It's my mom who died in childbirth from with my younger sister, and it's just like, I hated it so much.
Yeah,
I hated everything about it.
I think a lot of what she does, somebody mentioned that, like, you know, he's always the victim, but I think that by creating so many callbacks and connections between stuff that happened here and stuff later, it furthers this idea that like it was like almost out of his control. Like, he was a victim of all of these things. Like, oh my God, suddenly there's a victor from 12 named Katniss in the District 13. Like, it was like almost like targeted at being an attack against this character, President Snow, and that takes away some of the like agency of his evilness. Like had it not been a woman named Katniss, like maybe he wouldn't have murdered. No, that's not true. Why make these connections? Like, why? And they were none of them were particularly subtle where you were like, ooh, I wonder if that's a connection. It's literally like, we call this a swamp potato, but I like it by its other name better, Katniss.
Yep. Or the number of times that "May your odds be ever in your favor" was referenced in this book.
Or like, I knew the hanging tree was coming. Like, I was like,
I was so angry when that happened.
The first time that she sings in the book, I was like, we're going to get a backstory for that song that nobody asked for.
The amount of singing.
Yes. Singing. The fact that we were all angry about this being, I mean, not angry, but the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is a terrible title.
Yeah.
And like, everybody was just like, from the beginning, that's a terrible title. But little did we know we had to be angry because it was a musical happening.
Thank you. Literally the third act where they're like a country band singing on stage. I'm like, is this the same book? I feel like I'm watching a country musical right now. Like, the amount of songs in the third part of this book. And that's like a trope I don't like in books, is reading song lyrics. I did not come for poetry, and that is basically what a song without music is. So,
Yeah, I think the thing too is that I've seen some, and I haven't dived into this a ton because I wanted to talk to you guys first, but like I've seen some like defense of the book as far as like, well, this is pointing out how like when we have these disenfranchised people who are in like a middle class, you know, we have to appeal to them. And I'm like, no, we don't. This proves that like you can't really change their minds, that like he had all these opportunities to like be better and he just wasn't, because he had gotten it so stuck in his head about this like victim complex. So, and it just is so tone deaf for what we're currently going through. Like I know that this book was written, you know, before 2020, obviously. However, we've been building up. So the fact that she basically wrote a book that's like, how was Trump raised? You know, like what made him like this? I'm like, I don't fucking care, actually. So
Okay,
that
I
whole
don't
thing was
care.
gross.
I don't care. I don't fucking care about this story. But the fact that not only was she like, how was this person raised? And then she brings us back and her answer is like, well, he almost fell in love. Like,
Yeah.
really?
Right.
And war is hard, and so is being poor. Like, that's like the thing you wanted to give us 500 pages about is that a woman spurned him and he didn't like being poor, and that's how. Okay, I mean, I guess go off, but nobody needed this.
Yeah. Also, the love story, like I understand that she wasn't actually trying to romanticize the love story. I get that in theory. However, why focus on it so much then? Like, and focus on it in the way that she did, and just still have it be almost like you would in any other YA book with a love story, but make it awful and creepy and weird and he's possessive and all this stuff. Like I get she's it's in a tone where she's not saying that this is something to look up to, but it's still like, I don't want to read it. Like I this is not what I want to see. And he made her into his like manic pixie dream girl completely. And there's no like sort of narrative commentary on any of this. Like she just kind of gives it to you and is like, here. And you're like, why are you telling me? She's like, I don't know, look. I don't understand why you did this.
I also feel like Lucy Gray, like in general, like had no agency at all. Like I know nothing about her, like at all. And I get that maybe we were seeing through his viewpoint, but like I just rubbed me the wrong way like the entire time, especially when he became the peacekeeper and then like was extra possessive. Like I was just like, ooh, not here for that.
The line when he becomes the peacekeeper and he's like, I wish she was back in the Capitol so I knew that her life was being controlled because my life's being controlled. I'm like, please get wrecked completely. Like we already know that he's awful, but like there just were increasing lines of him being disgusting and you're like, I don't want to read this. Like
the whole thing about seeing it from his perspective, like seeing Lucy Gray from his perspective. So I feel like after I was like in the middle actually of like me being angry about this, I do what I always do. And I was like, what do other people have to say about this? Oh my God, there's a Slate review that absolutely made me livid because it was basically like The Hunger Games is YA, but this is a novel. It is fine art. And I was like, oh my God. So, and there's so much trash out there about like trash opinions about this. But one thing that people who enjoyed it, which you're allowed to, have to say, this is more like a psychological look at instead of like something that's plot heavy. But I don't think it did that particularly well because whereas Katniss is a very narrow first person, we follow her thoughts very intimately. Here, she pulls out and she does a third person limited. And so we're not even actually getting how he's processing a lot of these things. And so we're seeing Lucy Gray, but not necessarily from his close perspective. We're getting it from like a third person kind of thing. And so what are you telling me with this kind of like removed sort of narration? You're not necessarily framing it in like his messed up view. You're presenting it this way for the reader, and you're commentating on everything else, including stopping us to make sure we understand what all of your lyrics mean. Like, did you understand what the hanging tree was? We're like, no, Suzanne. You present like this stuff with the manic pixie dream girl, but make it dystopian, and then you're like, and the book ends. And I'm like, well, why?
Yeah, I feel like there's like a trust in your reader to like parse their own like interpretation of the book, but then she like literally does nothing with anything she presents us with. So like there's no thesis from her end either. So she's just literally giving us something and expecting us to decide what this book means. And like that, to me, like that, what's the point of the story then if you're not even giving your perspective of this situation?
Yeah.
So the other character, I mean, none of the characters really felt outside of like Snow. I felt like felt like more than anything than plot devices in Snow's story, where, you know, we had the manic pixie dream girl on one side, and then you have Sejanus that acts like his disembodied conscious at points, I guess. I don't know. How did you feel about him, and how did you feel about were there any characters that stood out to you? Not to me, but was there anybody that you found like had interest in?
So Janice just kept saying like he was the commentary of like, and almost every line that he said, I'm like, this could be applicable to like our real world right now. Like he just kept saying these one-liners that were like almost Suzanne's like ideas or something, but she like fed them through this other character. I don't know.
I really could have done with more Tigress. I thought she was maybe the most interesting, but we didn't get to see her a whole lot, and we never knew before that they were even related.
I was going to say, did we know that they were related in the other books?
I don't think so.
But yeah, I could have definitely used more of her and like what she had to go through as like his family member and like supporting them and stuff like that. But yeah.
I have a question about Tigress, because like when we meet her in Mockingjay, she hates Snow. Like she's happy that Katniss is coming to kill him, but like at that point, what has Snow done to her? Like we never get like satisfaction to like that end. So why introduce that if you're not going to give us? Like it's just ambiguous now. Like okay, what did he do? That made
like there was
to the point where she would want him dead. Like
no follow through to connect the two storylines.
That just felt sort of like, remember this person randomly selected from the third book? They're related. Like that's what it felt like to me.
Yeah, I mean, all of it, like I said before, was definitely like she just kind of picked out stuff that it's like, ooh, we can make these connections and it'll be interesting, and it's like it's really not. But at the same time, like the whole thing with Tigress, like eventually hating him, like my brain can kind of fill in like, oh, she was empathetic to the cause, so then him being so awful made her hate him, which is stuff that I could have done for all of the stuff in this book. Like as far as how we got to the point we got to, I think she was kind of like, let's go back and show you the original Hunger Games and how they were. And I'm like, well, I could kind of make these connections myself. Like I'm sure there's fan fiction out there. I haven't found it, but like I'm sure there's fan fiction out there that like went back to early games and built this and probably had a similar premise of like, this is what we did. Was it necessarily the kids that made up all these things? No, because that's whatever. But like you can kind of figure out how they had to like convince people to watch the games. They made it into a spectacle, all this stuff. So yeah, but the stuff with Tigress, I feel like other characters, I wouldn't say I was interested in them necessarily because they were all just kind of bland. However, I think this book, like I said before, would have been more interesting if maybe we had multiple POVs and we kind of followed all of them. Or if we followed even just Lucy and Snow, and then she had some agency, we kind of figured out what was going on with her. Like, I think this would have benefited from not just being focused on him, and we would have had a more full picture of everybody. And then that would have given everyone more agency and more complexity and just more interesting than just following him all the time.
But if we would follow Lucy, we would have to have an ending for her, and we don't have that here.
Correct. But maybe then she would have been required to give that, you know? So
even the stuff that, I know we were talking about characters, but going back to something Sam said about how like your brain can fill in some of this stuff, I felt like that way about so much of the ideas that she was presenting. Like for instance, when people talk about the Hunger Games, one of the things that they always say is that like, how is this plausible? How would this happen? Like or whatnot. And I think that one of the things that people one of the things that the books does is say, part of the reason that people accept this is because of all of this like pomp and circumstance and like the reality TV and the interviews. That's like part of what the original trilogy has already said. They make these people into characters. They detach like the killing and make it into a true spectacle. That was already presented in the trilogy itself, and it was confirmed when we had movies come out, and it was like, hi, the makeup from the Capitol, and everybody was like, yay. Dan's entire point was like, right, like we confirmed it for her, and then so to then bring us back again and be like, nobody's watching it because this is bad, and in so many words be like, we have to add a game element. Like I get it, that's true. We already got that. We were already there in the original trilogy. So again, I ask, why? Why this?
I almost feel like it could have been interesting from Sir Janus's perspective because, like, they aren't super close friends. So then it could be like through Sir Janus. I can't say his name. Like Snow could appear to grow, and then at the very end you find out that he actually hasn't at all, and he actually like plummets back down. That could have been interesting. And like the last scene was Sir Janice finding out that he had been betrayed and stuff like that. But yeah, Snow sucks.
If I had to choose a random character, I would choose Dean Highbottom because he's the one that came up with the initial idea of the game. So finding out like that's a more interesting struggle because he didn't actually mean it when he suggested it, and then it happened. So imagine being that person. So that would have been the one character I would have explored more probably.
I mean, any of the characters, in my opinion, would have been better than following just Snow. And also, like we've mentioned, you know, she purposely pulled out all of these sort of like Easter eggs to bring people back in. And I get that some people that have liked the book were like, oh, I love those Easter eggs. And like, that's fine. But also I'm like, I would have much preferred to see other parts of the world. Like we had this opportunity to maybe go back to a different district to see people from other districts, all of this stuff. And instead we're like back to 12. And it's like, we've already been here. Like, give me something else besides just 12 constantly, because it makes it seem like 12 is a more important thing than like the original trilogy really showed, like, because it's like 12 is kind of like a nothing, and all of a sudden we're giving it all this importance that it didn't have in the original context of the trilogy. Like the whole point was that like no one from 12 survives and like it doesn't really have any significance and whatever. So I would have liked to have seen, you know, even not necessarily one of the like District 2 or 3, but like 8, 7, you know, like one of these other ones, and getting what's going on there instead of going back to the same places we've been at before.
Didn't the little girl? I'm sorry.
Katniss's story is like a nobody from nowhere, right?
Yeah.
Like, and then you going back and then infusing all this extra meaning into her existence, like sort of undoes some of what you said about the story about a nobody from nowhere. And it's just like, again, why? Like, why?
Doesn't the little girl, as an older person, doesn't she head the black market in the Hunger Games at the Hob?
Is that who it is? I did not put that connection.
I didn't make that connection either.
I'm pretty sure that her name was Maud or Mauve or whatever.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think you're right.
I think you are right.
So like, again, why? Like, we don't need to know. Like, I wonder how that person ran the black market.
Yeah.
I don't care. You know, and again, I think we could have even gone, which district is like Finnick and Mags from? 6?
4.
4. So
What
I feel like
game
we
is
could have,
Mags in?
right. I feel like we could have even gone to like District 4, which we have this connection to, but we don't know a lot about, and seen them. Like, there were so many other districts we could have gone to, but instead they chose to, or she chose to take us right back to 12. And like Mari said, just unravel all of this stuff that she already had set up.
Well, and I feel like Mags's games has to have been sometime around when this was happening, because she's like 80 in the trilogy.
I feel like she's not that old, but they make her that old because it's
Maybe
hard
she's not.
life.
I always picture her to be like 80. I don't know.
She's supposed to be around Snow's age. Like,
She looks older than Snow in the movie.
right. Like, I kept thinking, like, is she gonna like, I thought maybe one of these characters in the game, when we were reading it, I was like, okay, Lucy's not gonna win because there's been no other victor from 12 that we like know of. Or somebody corrected me and said that actually like there were 2 victors, and they had said that in the books, which I don't remember them saying. But that the other victor from 12 had like died or something. But I kept being like, okay, so is Mags one of these characters and we just don't realize it? Like,
I was waiting for that. Because like
But-
you would think that if she's so important where she comes back around later, that she would have been like a prominent figure in their society at this time too.
Mhm.
I feel
That would have
like
been an easy character to slip in there.
even some of the themes that she thought she was exploring were things that we already got before. Peeta is one of my favorite characters in the Hunger Games, and his whole thing of like, you know, if they put me in the Hunger Games, I'm going to kill somebody, like, to defend myself. But at the end, I want to be myself. Like, I don't want them to take what is fundamentally me. And he's just like a sweet being the entire series. And so you already have this idea of like, are people inherently bad? Are they inherently good? If you put them in an arena, what will happen to them? Like, that whole exploration happens with not only with Peeta, but with a lot of the characters when we're talking about like what that is. So then to have it be Snow exploring, like, we already did this. Like, I don't understand. I don't understand what the value add is here at all. I told Nicole, like, I just want to find Suzanne and be like, are you okay, girl? Like, are you for help? Like, what is this?
Yeah.
What did you think when there was another plague in this book? Another infectious disease happened.
Oh, well,
Oh yeah,
I didn't.
blocked that out.
Yeah, I blocked it as well. I was kind of just like, no, like there's so much other stuff to worry about at this point. I'm like, I'm so used to seeing plagues. I'm like, whatever. Every book that we read for the whole year is gonna have a plague in it. So that's just how it's gonna work out.
Kayla, you mentioned, I think, pretty early about like the pacing of this book. So, I mean, honestly, the first 50 pages were him complaining about being poor.
Yep.
No, not a joke. The first 50 pages were like, yeah, cabbage and my yellow shirt and whatever else. And like, I don't know. It's separated into 3 parts, and they all like have like big, I guess, set pieces or plot pieces to it. But in general, this book was almost 500 pages, and it probably could have been half of that, is what I feel like. But what were some of the pacing things or plot things that really messed up for you?
I feel like having the Hunger Games part in the middle didn't make sense to me. And like the ending when he started training as a peacekeeper, that felt to me like part of like the middle of a book. Like, you know, you see him training and then you see him finding out some things about, oh, this is different than my life or whatever. That's like part of the middle of the book. And then I feel like it would have been better if like maybe it would have been switched, but obviously it wouldn't have worked. But I thought the Hunger Games part was probably the most entertaining, as terrible as that is to say, actually. But yeah, but that's what I probably would have done, kind of rearrange some of that stuff and cut out like 100 pages.
I expected it to cover more time for it being so long, like it to be more than just the games and then him becoming a peacekeeper. Like I felt there should be like, it should be years, like spanning years for a book that's so long.
Yeah, I felt like it could have been 2 books. Like I felt like the Hunger Games portion of it, like the beginning where he's in the Capitol, was like very like one sort of story, and then him being a peacekeeper was another, because the whole ending where like Suzanne gets portrayed, he kills Lucy, all of that stuff. It sort of
Tony,
felt.
sorry.
That is how I felt. That exact sound. It sort of like that was the brainchild of the book. Was like I could tell like him betraying a really good friend and killing the love of his life. Maybe that's what like set her off. Like, oh, I want to write this story about Snow because of the way it was written. And I feel like 2 books. No books at all, but 2 books if I had to choose.
I mean,
but not a second book to this book.
Yeah, it felt like tonally different. Like the first 2 and then the last one. Like when we had the end of like the second part, and I was like, oh, like as soon as he said he's going to be a peacekeeper in 12, I was like, fuck this. Like I didn't want to read anymore. I was done. I was over it. I mean, I was over it before that, but that was when I was really like, I wish I could put this down. And again, the ending was so boring. Like it just dragged on so much when you have like the Hunger Games stuff, which yes, like Kayla said, it is, I guess, semi more interesting. And that's kind of the point of the original series, where it's like, look, you love the spectacle, you love this, like this drama, you love this game. Look at how fucked up that is. Like we've already made that point. So to have this ending where like nothing happens, and then at the very end she like rushes through him, like, you know, maybe killing Lucy, going kind of like a little nuts, like whatever. For what? Why?
It's funny. I mean, yes, because we're talking about kind of like the Hunger Games being like it's not even that it's more enjoyable. Like it's the like only action you get in this book. So it starts happening and you're like, okay, here we go. Like I just have been spending all this time hearing about how sad and poor he is, and now we're finally in the games. But then like the games happen, and the whole thing is that it's so boring because like they haven't figured out the games yet. And so they're describing the games and they're like, nothing's happening. And you're like, no kidding. I know. It was just absolutely crazy to me that was like a highlight, and it was still a low light of the book. And then the like split and start to part 3, it did really feel like 2 separate stories, but I don't want to read any of them. I don't know. It was wild. I was incredibly bored by a lot of this story, and which is why. So I was thinking about my rating, and like my 1-star books, I don't give like no stars. So my 1-star books are like Twilight, and I think I gave like The Selection like 1 star. So they're books that like have no redeeming qualities to me. Suzanne Collins can write, so there is like a certain amount of like, you strung words together, you did it. and you can tell that she has a certain amount of skill. But then I'm like, but you bored me. This wasn't even like entertaining. This wasn't a good characterization. This wasn't a good exploration of like a messed up psyche. This wasn't a good anything. So you get half a star for being able to string words together better than Stephanie Meyer, but there was no portion of this a good book to me.
Right. And just the level of, I know we've said it, but just having to read this book in 2020 during the current political climate while protests are happening against police violence, and having Snow go be a police officer and have the police officers back then be like kind of fine and like not and kind of nice. I'm like, fuck you entirely. Like, I do not need this. And again, I know she was doing it before a lot of this happened, but we also know police brutality's been happening. So like, let's not read about how people do choose to like dehumanize certain people. Like we've already learned that how they did that in the original trilogy. Like none of this is something that we needed to go over again in our current political climate in the United States.
She does that a lot. Like she talks about kids being in cages in this book as well.
Yep.
And she talks about how it's all about the industries and the businesses and people don't matter. It's all fending for themselves. And I was just like, I know why.
It's not doing anything groundbreaking, and that's what I think irritates me about some of the, like, again, people can like whatever they like, but when people are really fiercely defending this, they're saying like, she's pointing out the kids in cages, she's pointing all this stuff, and I'm like, yes, however, she's just giving it to us and not really saying much about it. Like she's just telling us, and it's like, we already know. And anyone that's going to be like, yeah, I know these things are bad, like, is going to know that. Like, you're not changing anyone's mind that like doesn't know these things are bad, you know, because she's not making any kind of like, she's not trying to teach anything. And again, not that every book needs to do that, but The Hunger Games does do that. Like The Hunger Games has themes and has points that it makes, and this doesn't. So it really felt like, yes, I know that Suzanne still wrote this, but it didn't feel like it was her, because it just felt so, I was like, did someone ghostwrite? Yes, I was like, is this ghostwritten? Like, I don't understand what you were trying. I know we've said it over and over, but like, what were you trying to do? I want to find an interview with her and be like, why?
So Paige, I think you said it early, but it's definitely like a privilege to sit here and be like, let me tell you about the thoughts of an oppressor. And people be like, ooh, like, no, girl, we know. Like, literally, very early on, they're at the zoo and he's like, what? He takes a moment to pause from being within the cages and be like, what the hell? To be like, why are so many people here? Shouldn't they be working? Shouldn't these kids be at school? This is what's wrong with our country. And I'm like, do you think you're doing something here? Do you think that like these are not talking points that people already know that oppressors have? Like, you're not adding anything. You're not exploring these thoughts. You're not informing us of anything by telling us that Snow, a child murdering dictator from the future, had these thoughts formatively. Like, we could have, like, duh. Like, I know that. So I just, to have the privilege to be here and be like, hey, so here's some things, kids in cages, police are cool, and this is what the oppressor thinks. Bye.
Right.
Yeah, and it made me,
Suzanne.
it made me wonder how much of like the original trilogy, like all the things we say like we enjoy about it, how much was like us putting our perspective onto the story. Because like I'm thinking of like District 11 and how when I was watching the first film / reading the books, like in the film specifically, District 11 is primarily Black and they are the first district to riot. So that hit me differently this time around. And then this time I was like, but I don't know if like that was a choice in the films. And then Suzanne gives us 2 Black people who are tributes in District 11. I'm like, oh no, she made the choice to make the agricultural district to be all Black people and doesn't discuss that in any sense in the book, like, again. So I feel like some of it is like us being like, okay, there are like themes in there that are really interesting to discuss, but we're giving her too much credit at this point if this book is anything to go by. Like, I feel like it was a lot of like our discussions and pulling like our own like ideas from this book rather than her being like the paragon of like, think of these things, guys.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said too, like when you're mentioning that whole like agriculture district and things too, is that like she doesn't really give she doesn't make the characters aware of their political history as far as like America's history. So like she knows that some of us know, like Americans or people that are like, you know, North America that are aware of kind of like American history, that like we did used to put people in zoos. Like we have put kids in cages. The 4th of July is important. All of a sudden that gets thrown in somewhere, which I don't think was in the originals. agriculture and like, slaves and everything. Like all of this stuff is an important context that like she doesn't really, not that we need it spoon fed to us, but like it would make more sense that the characters are like aware of some of this stuff and they're just not. And that is also like a really jarring thing too, because it's like you're kind of pointing out that this is like a systemic historical thing, but you're not really giving the characters that context at all.
There's almost like a gap in her history and storytelling too, because I think it's Lucy Gray who said something like this place existed for years and years without the Capitol, and it will exist for years and years afterward. Like people continue with or without their oppressors, like they will continue. And Snow's thing is kind of like, well, it ended badly for them originally, but that gap of like why, how, leading up to what exactly happened and why the Capitol is the way that is all missing for us. So we all just kind of are like, yeah, the Capitol. Like, and then everybody in this world like is not or like aware enough of that history, I guess. And so to have like these random mentions, like you said, Sam, of like 4th of July and this and that, it's kind of like, okay, like you're messing up your own thing. Stop it. Somebody in the comments wants to know what our thoughts are on Dr. Gall or Dr. Ghoul.
The Nazi scientist?
Yeah.
I mean,
The Nazi scientist.
The Nazi scientist.
Just really just like beat us over the head with shit, just do that. Because there were a lot of, just that like experimenting on people for like making things better for the sake of science. Like that is all very like Nazi scientist stuff. So, and also kind of like her molding him thing was a little like also unnecessary, because I'm like, he was always going to be bad. He didn't like, we don't need her as this like influence on him to make him worse. Like he was kind of like, it almost was acting like she was. And I'm like, no, he was bad the whole time, even before her influence.
I think that the like biggest way that I can compare and contrast the original trilogy and this is that like in the original trilogy, we explore a lot of these themes of like how the Capitol controls the districts. In this, we literally have a Nazi scientist assigning an essay on chaos and control. And he's like, chaos and control. And you're like, excuse me, like, did you just have a plot appropriate like school lesson dropped in here? Like this is an after school special? Why?
And the whole essay that he writes and the topics he chooses from that, he's like, people will riot without having proper rules to enforce. And then they go into like the whole social contract commentary in there too. We need to abide and choose rules as a society to all agree on together.
It's actually painful to read. Somebody asked in the comments, do you think this is a cynical money grab on Collins' part? I'm laughing because I said in the group chat, like, I'm going to ask you guys why this book happened. And the first thing Connor did was like send the money tongue emoji. So, I mean, obviously we can't answer for Suzanne Collins. And honestly, I spent the whole book trying to like asking myself why. Do you think it is like money motivated, or do you think that she was trying to say something and missed, or like how jaded are your thoughts right now about the existence of this book? Basically,
I'm just confused. Like the Mockingjay came out almost like 9 or 8 years ago. Like why now? Like it's so long, and this is what we get. Like I just it doesn't compute in my head. Like this is the subject that she wanted to tell after a decade. Like I don't get it.
I think that it's interesting that, I mean, like a lot of authors will go back to their most popular work and like expand the world and add more stories. I mean, Cassandra Clare, we read another one of her extensions. I just think that it's weird that this is just a random prequel standalone, because most times when authors go back and want to add more, there's like a plan for it instead of just like one random book.
Yep.
we've been tempting fate a lot. This is going to end up being like some trilogy. We've mentioned.
Yeah, that's what you said, Steph.
Like, she's going to be like, you like that? Check out this. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole time I was reading, I mean, similar to what you guys were saying, I'm just kind of like, what is the point? I hesitate to think it's a money grab because, again, like Connor and like Kayla were saying, like, why not sooner? Like, if it was going to be a money grab, like, why do it now? So then, like, since Lainey's not here, I put like my conspiracy theory cap on, and I'm like, was she approached by the publisher and kind of like talked into it? Like, is it something about 2020 being just like the bad place, and like this had to happen because like this is the bad place, and all of our faves are coming back? Well, not all of our faves, but like people from the past are coming back and being like, awful. Like, is she just part of that and the dismantling of our heroes? Like, what is it? Because at this point, I'm like, money grab. I don't know, because it just feels so weak. I don't know, but maybe that's just the point of it being a money grab too, that she just was like, here, give me money.
I don't know. It's just also weird because Suzanne Collins can write. She has a middle grade series, which is awesome. Yes. So like, I don't know. I just don't get it.
Part of me really does think like she wanted to explore the whole idea of like privilege, and like when someone's promised privilege and they're not given it. Like, I think that's what she was trying to explore, but it just was not the time, and it missed.
Yeah,
so,
missed
like,
the mark.
That's what I think it was, to be honest, reading that.
I think that Suzanne is a really good writer, and I think that what she did in the Hunger Games trilogy is like a mark of like, she did good things. She made a really interesting world, good characters. I think that she also got lucky in some part, because especially if you reread this, I mean, lucky because the movie adaptations made this into a giant thing. The books were really popular, but that definitely made it like a pop culture thing. And I think those adaptations, in some ways, are some of the best book to movie adaptations that you see. So that is one thing. But also, like, in rereading, I was like, she had no way of knowing that this would grow and our like, I don't know, things would get as bad as they are in the world. We are in the bad place, and she made this thing that like now fits the bad place so well.
Yes.
Like, you did not know. That was like a little bit of luck. And I don't know if maybe she got a little too cocky and was like, all these stories, you know, we're gonna tell next this story about a, you know, dictator, child murderer. Like, I got this, and then it's like, no, honey, you do not got this. Like, I don't know.
I do think that she was trying, like Paige said, to tackle privilege and what happens when they're denied it, and then what happens when they're offered to reclaim that privilege that they have over other people. And like, you can see it happens throughout this whole book. Like, he gets knocked down a few pegs, and then he's given the opportunity, and he betrays everyone and leaves and goes and takes advantage of it. I just didn't feel like it was done particularly well, like Paige said. It's just like she could have done so much more and been much more deliberate about the delivery.
The other thing, like, if you're going to have this character that everybody is at least going to maybe love to hate, or one of the things he says early is like, I have no money, but I have charm. Did anybody find Snow charming at all?
No.
Like, was there anything about him that you were like, oh, I see why people blindly follow him? Or like, the characterization wasn't good. Like, it wasn't like, you know, a Loki where you're like, you kill people, but I love you. You know, like anything like that, where you saw any sort of that charm that would excuse or like ingratiate you to this character. It was just, he was absolutely bland. There was nothing. She did not convince me one bit about him being charming, about him ever loving or thinking about anybody other than himself. Like, I don't know if it was because I went into it kind of like braced and skeptical, but also you didn't convince me. So.
Well, even his family throughout the entire book tells him that he's going to be the president one day. So like, they feed right into it too. So you never have any reason to believe that he's not.
Although a lot of white people do that. Like, white parents really flop
I
their
was
children.
never told that I was going to be president. I
wasn't either.
Thing, not a white woman thing. Okay.
I went to a private school, and a lot of the kids there, all their parents were like always building them up and telling them how great they were going to be and how good they were at stuff. And it was like, but that's not true.
I hate that.
So we talked about like how if this book were like, who would rather see it from a point of view, but do you guys think that you could fix this book about like President Snow? If you're gonna tell President Snow's story, how do you do it?
I think what
Everyone's
maybe
I would. Yeah, I honestly don't think I would.
I would not fix it, but I feel like if she had written this from a first person, very like broken, chaotic thought process, where you're like, where it's more like, I don't like a mystery thriller, kind of like just like that really dark place, it would have came off a little better.
Yeah, maybe like, you know how people talk about the book You and how uncomfortable it is to read because he's
Yeah.
like the way that it's told makes you so uncomfortable. I think
that's what
kind
this
of what Jordan
needed.
was saying.
Yeah, that's what this needed.
I think maybe even like Jordan was saying, like, again, I wouldn't choose to write it this way. However, I think maybe having more of like a longer series of time and kind of these other things, like, again, not focus so much on 12. Stop doing that. That's ridiculous. And maybe have him like kind of build his hate for all the districts, because again, I don't think that he only hated 12. Like, he hated all of them. So kind of have these experiences of him just like hating everybody throughout like his life, instead of it just focusing on like he had this experience as a teen and that made him who he is. Like, no, false. Maybe that would make it slightly better. Again, not something I want to read, but improve slightly to like a 2-star maybe.
Or even like a follow through to when he is President Snow that we see in the later books.
Like the rise to power. Like,
yeah, I feel like evil people being evil toward each other would have been more interesting for me to read than this team thing.
I think one of the big questions the original trilogy asked that I like it made me think a lot was like, how do you get to a point in the society where people let this happen? And of course, a lot of that is oppression, like, you know, the poor people and the way that they kind of manipulated everything. But then, you know, you start to break down the idea of rebellion and when people hit their max and how they start to come together. So I think the opposite question is, how does a society let somebody like President Snow come into power? It's not necessarily what makes President Snow bad. I don't fucking care. He's bad. Like, we know that. But the idea of like who around him like enabled that, or how he came into power, or what were the things at the very beginning of his power that people kind of let happen and how that built, like, that maybe is a more fascinating lens rather than how did this one specific person be evil. Like,
what was happening? Oh,
go ahead.
Like, what was happening in their society that they would latch onto a person like this?
I think she tries a little bit to do that with Sir Janis, because like he excuses a lot of things that Snow does, and Tigris, because Tigris just believes that he's a good guy, and like he's like, I think at one point Tigris asks him like, "This is what you were intending to do, right?" And it's like the good approach, and he's like, "Yeah." So I think that she does that a little bit, but I don't think that she does it as much if that was what she was going to explore.
Yeah. I think also like the critique that Mari was talking about earlier, I've also heard people say like, oh, this is more of an adult novel, which it's not. It's still very much a YA novel. So I don't know why people keep saying that like, oh, she made this for adults. Like, no, she didn't. But I think if she did do that, that would have been maybe even more interesting, and make it like we're saying, like him as an adult, seeing him come into power, seeing the people around him, because really like you can't act like this teenager had all this power. Like that puts too much emphasis on like these teens should have stopped him. This, no, they can do a little bit, but like, teens are still powerful in their own way. But like, as far as the later on political stuff, I think that would have been a better message again for our current times of like, here's the things people could have done to stop him and they didn't do it. Here's the things that we're seeing happen that we could stop. How about we do that? Like that kind of stuff. And instead she made it about this teenager that like, how are you supposed to really do anything with a teen? So that was another thing too, that just kind of like removed almost other people's impact on his story.
Somebody in the comments said, I wanted more people to not trust him in the narrative because his actions seem sketchy, but no one really calls him out.
Yeah.
That is so true. And for a while, I thought it was a dean who like, how like Dumbledore was following Voldemort around like the whole time. Like I thought that was the dean. He was like, keeping an eye on him, but then it ended up being like the connection to his father more than anything else. It wasn't even. And so I'm like, all of you guys are seeing this behavior and nobody is like registering, like, it felt wrong. It felt not good
Especially because how you said he was so bland. Like, if they would have amped up his charm and really made him this like very charming person, okay, but the fact that it's like, why is Lucy believing that he's so into her? Like, why are all these people thinking that he's their best friend, he's so nice? And adults do the same thing too, where like adults are very fooled by him, and I'm like, but he's not even trying, like he's not even doing anything. Like, at least make him a really manipulative narcissist, and that would be slightly more interesting.
He needed like a serial killer charisma to him.
Yes,
he needed like a Ted Bundy charisma to him, and he just didn't have that.
Yeah. Somebody else asked, if this book were read before the Hunger Games, would that change opinions? Like if this book had come out first.
I wouldn't have read the Hunger Games.
I think it would make the Hunger Games worse. Yeah, it would make the Hunger Games worse because again, she added in all these connections post Hunger Games that then you don't see him follow through with. Like, he isn't like, Katniss, it's that herb, or like, or like the Mockingjays. You know, like he doesn't actually do any of that in the story, so it doesn't really make sense as like a continued thing. It's definitely a story that was made to have Easter eggs to bring you back to the original trilogy.
I read it on Kindle, and when they talked about him hating the Mockingjays on site, literally like 1,000 people highlighted this quote, and I was like, guys.
No, this is not groundbreaking. This is not like smart. You're not seeing anything cool here happen. Please don't.
The birds are singing. I hate them.
If she had left that out completely, and then afterwards, like at the hanging, you know, then Mockingjay started singing. He was like, "Wow, I hate those birds." But the fact that she's like, "Mockingjays, I hate them." You're like,
yeah.
Why? We didn't need that. Just mention them. Let the reader be like, "Ooh, there are the Mockingjays," and then later maybe develop why he hates them, which I think is, again, too many coincidences. A Katniss, Mockingjay from District 12, like that it's too much.
Yeah.
But if you're gonna do it, there was like a more gentle way to do that versus than just like making him hate it on sight.
And I feel like I think Maddie like touched on this earlier, but all those things like take away from what Katniss actually did for the revolution. Like in the trilogy, like he hated her for like more than just the reason of what she stood for, and I don't like that at all.
Yeah, I feel like it would have taken away from the trilogy because like the part I liked most about it was Katniss was a nobody. Like nobody knew who she was, but it was her small decisions that caused like the rebellion to spark. And the whole idea, like people have been asking if she's related to the Coveys because her dad can sing really well, she can sing really well, and I'm like, that makes it worse for me now.
Yes.
I was expecting for a ancestor of hers to pop up somewhere in District 12.
Yeah. When I read that theory, I was like, but then that like leads into the chosen one trope again, and like we just got away from it with this book, so why?
I kept thinking about the newest Star Wars trilogy.
Yes.
Oh God, please don't.
Yes.
Like all the stories that go from nobody from nowhere to like, psych, there's somebody.
The worst. It's the worst. Oh God.
I don't want it at all.
Somebody in. Oh, go ahead, Connor.
Someone pointed out the catching fire line.
My eyes almost got stuck in my head. I rolled them so hard.
You know, it's bad because we all remember the line.
Yeah.
How obvious it was.
I mean, some of you guys haven't read this for years, and you still felt how heavy-handed, like how hammered home.
Let me slap you over the head with it.
You read it, and you're still like, "Excuse me, sir." So, a couple months ago, I was dying. It just felt so self-referential. It's almost like self-congratulatory. Like you see, like I felt like Suzanne was right here the whole time, going. Like,
right. That's what I pointed out.
Like,
yep.
I said catching fire. Did you see?
Did you get it?
Yes, Suzanne, I saw.
There's even a line in the first chapter where Snow's like, I become too fixated on one thing and then I miss the bigger picture. And I'm like, that's literally the entire trilogy. Why are you doing that? That's when I knew what this book was going to be.
All of my highlighted lines are things like that where I'm just like, okay. Things that are like, if I went out loud, I could remember what it was. Any other questions from the comments?
Someone mentioned earlier in the comments, like, what if this gets turned into a movie?
It is.
I think
the options have been bought.
Right. Yeah.
the director.
Yeah, people are like dreamcasting people, and
No.
I'm like, why are you doing this to me? It's like all my
No.
recommended videos because I've been watching reviews, and they're like, my dreamcast for ballads, and I'm like, no.
Do you think that they would change anything about it though?
I hope they would give characters.
Probably.
I hope.
hope.
I hope.
Yeah.
Other things that made me groan. Rue's song, and then having like a death that was kind of like Rue's as
Yes.
well.
Yes.
Did we need it? Did we need it?
Was Rue's song in the book? I totally missed that.
Oh yeah, Deep in the Meadow.
In the meadow.
Yeah, the meadow song. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Which again, I recognize, and I haven't read it in like 9 years. Like, I was like, what the hell is this? Like, oh my god! But yeah, so many of the things.
Cole Sprouse as President Snow.
No, I
Which time does she sing that?
no.
While they're at the lake, when they're taking a nap at the lake, she sings the
Of
meadow.
course, because of the lake, which had to be part of this as well.
Yep.
I literally blocked that out. I don't remember that happening.
There's too many songs.
That's fair.
There were too many songs. I agree.
I'm gonna work really hard from this moment on to block this entire experience.
I actually had started to until we started this. I was kind of like, I think I'm forgetting things. Then you guys were bringing things up, and it came rushing back in like a dramatic way. So
yeah,
I like how someone said that this is like Cursed Child.
I think
still
that
haven't
authors shouldn't come back around like this if they don't already have it like planned. Like, at least for all of Cassie Clare's like faults, I always feel like she plans to have like this many books. Like, she's kind of like, and then I'm going to look into this person, and then I'm going to look into this person. Like, you kind of know that she's going to do this. Where this is like when authors come back like 10 years later with like a weird Hail Mary, like, hey, we're back. No, I never want it. I never want you to do it this far out from the original thing, because has it ever been done well? When this has happened? No.
For YA recently, no.
The answer is no.
And it's actually, I feel like, harder to go back and do a prequel because you have to get it to a point. There's like restrictions on where it can go.
Yeah.
It's easier to come back in and add later stuff. So go ahead.
But no, I don't know. I'm like sitting here, like, just it's like washing over me how terrible this whole experience is. I feel like the conversation is winding down, but I'm like, no, but I just have all these feelings. Have I said everything? Have I expressed everything?
Because we're trying to like purge it to like, if we talk about all of it, we can let it go. But like we had to experience this group trauma together, and like we're never gonna be able to let it go. It's like a lesser extent of like Game of Thrones finale. Like, we're gonna be mad. Like, whenever someone brings up, like, remember when Suzanne Collins? We're gonna be like, you know, like years later. So.
We generally don't really talk like in specifics about the things that we're reading, but the like trauma updates as we were reading, and like, yes. Guys, oh my gosh, guys, like throughout. And a page, I think you were the first one to finish, and you were like, let me know when you guys start.
I was the first to start. Connor finished before me because I put the book down when he became a peacekeeper, because like the protests were happening, and I'm like, I'm taking a break, 2 weeks off, can't do this. Yeah.
The chapters were so long. Like, I hate long chapters, and these were like literally so long, and it just added to the pacing problems. And yes. I had to like bribe myself. I'm like, I'm gonna read a chapter and then I can watch a YouTube video. Terrible.
I had days during this where I didn't read, which during quarantine like hasn't really happened to me, but I was like, I don't want to read this, so I'm gonna go procrastinate and do something else entirely. And I never have like full days of not reading these days.
It's one of those books that like when you're reading the chapter, you flip
the
pages to see how many.
Like, when is it done?
Yep.
I kept like, it was like making it worse, I know, but I would like read like 3 pages and be like, what percentage am I on? Like, bitch, the same percentage. It's awful. All right. I think that if there's nothing else in the comments, we are due for win. I feel like we've had a string of like bad books, so we really wanted to go for something that, I mean, I don't know. We always think that we might like it, but
yes,
we want like we need like a sure bet. So we're going for next month, Akata Witch by Nnedi Okorafor. I have high hopes.
Send us your good intentions, manifest it, please.
If you did not like this book, don't even tell me. I need help. At the very least, I'm confident in saying that it will probably be better than this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be better than our last 2 books. So
Yes.
Absolutely.
that's
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us. And thank you for listening to all of our thoughts. I will just leave you with this final why. Why?
why though.
Mhm.
We will be announcing the time and date for the live show for the next book on our Twitter. You can always check out our Instagram, where Connor has been doing some amazing plot lays of all of our reads. So make sure that you're following us on social media, and we will see you guys again next month. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.